People think grief makes you weak. They're wrong. Grief makes you hollow, and when you're hollow, there's plenty of room to pack in the gunpowder. My stepmother threw away the only things my dead mother left behind. So, I didn't just ruin her life. I dismantled her entire reality. The house smelled like bleach and synthetic lavender. That was the first thing Brenda changed when she moved in. She waged a holy war against anything that felt lived in. My mother, Stella, was a printmaker. For 20 years, she smelled like linseed oil, cedar, and bergamot. Her presence was heavy, textured, and unapologetic. When breast cancer took her, it didn't take her ghost. Her ghost lived in the massive, bruised oak apothecary cabinet at the end of the upstairs hallway. That cabinet was a beast. It had 40 tiny drawers, each one with a tarnished brass cup pull. Mom used it to store her hand-carved linoleum blocks, her custom mixed inks, her sketching journals, and the small, strange things she collected from beaches and flea markets. It wasn't just furniture. It was the physical manifestation of her mind. I was 24, living in a cramped apartment 2 hours away. I only came back to the house when the guilt of ignoring my father outweighed the nausea of seeing Brenda. It was a Tuesday in October. I used my key to get in. The house was dead quiet. I walked up the stairs, my hand sliding along the banister, preparing myself for the usual uncomfortable dinner. I turned the corner at the landing. I stopped. The hallway was empty. Not just empty, it was violently blank. Where the apothecary cabinet had stood for 2 decades, there was nothing but a fresh coat of stark white paint and a ridiculous, flimsy glass console table. On the table sat a single, geometric silver vase holding 3 fake monstera leaves. My brain didn't process it. I actually blinked, like a glitching computer trying to render an image. I walked forward. My boots clicked on the hardwood. I stood in front of the glass table. There were faint indentations in the floorboards where the heavy oak legs of Mom's cabinet used to dig into the wood. "Oh, you're early." I turned. Brenda was standing in the doorway of the master bedroom. She was wearing a beige cashmere sweater set. Brenda was a woman who believed beige was a personality. She had sharp, bird-like features and a smile that never reached her eyes. It was a smile she used as a shield, daring you to call her out on her passive aggression. "Where is it?" I asked. My voice sounded flat, distant. Brenda sighed, a performative, breathy sound that suggested I was being entirely unreasonable before the conversation even started. "Claire, honey, we talked about this." "We absolutely did not talk about this." I didn't yell. I just stared at her. "Where is the cabinet, Brenda?" My father emerged from behind her. Arthur. He looked older than his 58 years. Since Mom died, he had shrunk. He let Brenda dress him, let Brenda feed him, let Brenda manage his existence so he wouldn't have to feel the gaping hole in his life. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He looked firmly at the baseboards. "Artie and I decided it was time to freshen up the upstairs," Brenda said, stepping in front of my dad to claim the space. "That old thing was just a dust trap. It made the hallway feel so dark and heavy. We need light, Claire. We need to move forward. It's bad energy to hold on to clutter." Clutter. Where is it? The words tasted like copper in my mouth. "I called a Holloway service yesterday morning," she said, waving a manicured hand dismissively. "They were wonderful. Took the whole thing, contents and all. I didn't even have to bag anything up." The floor tilted. The blood rushed out of my head so fast my vision dotted with static, contents and all. Mom's journals, the block prints she made when she was pregnant with me, the silver locket she kept in the top left drawer, the dried hydrangeas from her own mother's funeral. "You threw it away," I whispered. "Donated, I'm sure," Brenda corrected quickly, though her tone was entirely indifferent. "The men said they recycle and repurpose. It's gone to a better place." I looked at my father. "Dad, tell me you didn't let her do this." He shifted his weight. He rubbed the back of his neck. "Claire, sweetheart, it's just things. Your mother is in our hearts." Brenda's right. The house was feeling like a museum. We have to live in the present. He was reciting her script. I could see the strings moving his jaw. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I think if I had started screaming, I would have literally torn Brenda's throat out with my teeth. The violent swelling in my chest was absolute and terrifying. It wasn't a hot rage. It was a freezing, suffocating blackness. "Who did you call?" I asked. "What?" Brenda blinked. "What company did you call? Give me the name." "Claire, stop being dramatic. I don't remember. Some flyer in the mail." "Give me the fucking name, Brenda, or I will take a hammer to every single piece of glass in this house." I didn't raise my voice. I spoke with the calm, flat certainty of a weather report predicting a hurricane. She took a step back. For a second, the beige facade cracked, revealing genuine alarm. She looked at my dad, but he was staring at his shoes, entirely useless. "J-Bros junk removal," she muttered. "They took it to the municipal transfer station." I turned around, walked down the stairs, and walked out the front door. I didn't slam it. I closed it very, very quietly. I sat in my car in the driveway for 10 minutes. I didn't turn the engine on. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned yellow, breathing in through my nose, out through my mouth. I dialed J-Bros junk removal. A guy named Mike answered. Over the roar of a diesel engine in the background, he told me that anything made of solid wood that heavy gets tossed straight into the crushers at the county dump. They don't donate. They don't repurpose. Brenda had lied to make herself sound better. "Listen to me," I told Mike, my voice cracking for the first time. "I will give you $1,000 cash if you tell me that truck hasn't dumped yet." "Lady, that truck dumped yesterday at 2 p.m. I'm sorry." I hung up. I drove to the county landfill. I don't know what I expected. A miracle? A movie moment where I find the cabinet perfectly intact sitting atop a pile of soft trash? I pulled up to the weighing station. The smell hit me immediately, a rotting, sweet chemical decay that coated the back of my throat. I parked illegally near the chain-link fence of the commercial drop-off zone. I walked up to a worker in a high-vis vest and practically begged him. I described the cabinet. I described the journals. He took off his hard hat and looked at me with deep, exhausted pity. "Miss, yesterday's haul is already compacted and buried under 20 tons of today's garbage. Even if you knew the exact coordinates, it's smashed to splinters. You can't go out there." I stood by the fence for an hour, watching the bulldozers push mountains of debris into the earth. The sky was a flat, unforgiving gray. My mother's handwriting, the smell of her skin, the blocks she carved with her own hands, bleeding onto the wood when her gouge slipped, her thoughts, her fears, her art, all of it bulldozed into the dirt, mixing with rotting food and dirty diapers, erased. Brenda hadn't just thrown away furniture. She had actively chosen to wipe my mother's fingerprints off the earth. She wanted a clean slate. She wanted to be the only woman who had ever existed in that house. And my father, in his pathetic weakness, had let her. I drove back to my apartment. I didn't turn on the lights. I sat on the floor of my shower, fully clothed, and let the cold water hit me until my lips turned blue. I cried until I threw up. I grieved the second death of my mother. I grieved the loss of my father, realizing he was already a ghost himself. But around 3 a.m., the tears stopped. I dried off. I put on sweatpants. I sat at my kitchen table and opened my laptop. The grief was gone. In its place was a sharp, crystalline focus. Brenda valued a few very specific things in her life. She valued control. She valued her reputation in their affluent suburban community. She valued her curated aesthetic, which was her armor against the fact that she was a deeply insecure, deeply boring woman. She was the vice president of the local Heritage Garden Society. She hosted wine tastings. She lived for the validation of her peers. She wanted a sterile, perfect life. I was going to infect it. I realized then that screaming at Brenda would do nothing. Hitting her would get me arrested. Suing her for the monetary value of an old cabinet would result in a check from my father's bank account, which meant nothing to me. No, to break a woman like Brenda, you couldn't attack her frontally. You had to rot the floorboards from underneath her. You had to make her doubt her own mind. You had to make her community doubt her sanity. And you had to make my father wake up and realize he was living with a monster. I began to draft a blueprint. 3 weeks later, I drove back to my father's house. I brought a box of artisanal, gluten-free pastries from a bakery I knew Brenda obsessed over. I wore a neutral-colored sweater. I rang the doorbell instead of using my key. Brenda answered. She looked guarded, her eyes darting to my hands to see if I was holding a weapon. "Claire," she said, holding the door halfway shut. "Hi, Brenda," I said, forcing my voice to sound small, contrite, and defeated. I looked down. "Can I come in? I want to apologize." The door opened wider. The sheer triumph that flashed across her face was almost blinding. Narcissists cannot resist an apology. To them, it is absolute proof of their superiority. We sat in the sterile living room. My dad hovered in the background, looking relieved that the conflict was magically resolving itself. "I reacted terribly," I said, staring at the glass coffee table. I was holding on to the past. I've been talking to a therapist. She helped me see that you were right. The house needed to breathe. Mom is gone, and holding on to old wood wasn't going to bring her back. Brenda leaned forward, placing a warm, patronizing hand on my knee. I resisted the urge to flinch. "Oh, sweetie, I'm so glad you see it that way. I know change is hard, but we are a family. We have to look toward the future." "I know," I said, giving her a weak smile. "I'd like to start coming over more. If that's okay, I want to help you with the house. Maybe help you with the garden prep for the Heritage Society tour." I had offered her free labor and complete submission. She practically purred. That was the beginning. I became the dutiful daughter. I started visiting twice a week. I learned Brenda's routines. I learned the layout of her life. And I began to plant the termites. Step 1 was the sensory warfare. Brenda prided herself on the smell of her house. It was always Joe Malone diffusers, crisp and citrusy. I went online and tracked down the exact obscure brand of linseed oil my mother used for her printmaking. I bought essential oils of cedar and a specific, heavy bergamot perfume my mom wore every day. I mixed them in a small spray bottle. Every time I visited, when Brenda was in the bathroom or out running an errand, I would spray just a tiny mist of the mixture. I didn't spray it in the open. I sprayed it in the air return vents of the HVAC system. I sprayed a drop on the underside of my father's favorite armchair. I rubbed a little onto the inner fabric of Brenda's expensive cashmere throws. It was faint, just at the edge of perception. It took 2 weeks for it to hit. We were sitting at dinner. My dad suddenly stopped chewing his chicken. He looked around the dining room, his brow furrowing. He took a deep breath. "Do you smell that?" he asked. "Smell what, Artie?" Brenda asked, sipping her Pinot Grigio. "It smells like the studio, like Stella's old workroom." His eyes widened slightly. There was a flicker of something in his face, pain, but also a sudden, sharp memory. Brenda froze, her nostrils flared. "I don't smell anything except the roast chicken." "No, it's there. It's faint, but God, it smells exactly like her." Dad looked genuinely shaken. He looked at the air vent. "Artie, that's ridiculous!" Brenda snapped. Her voice was too loud. "The house is completely clean. We painted over that room a year ago." "I know, but I smell it," he insisted. I kept my head down, cutting my chicken. "I think I smell it too, Dad," I murmured. "Just a hint. Maybe it's trapped in the ductwork?" Brenda glared at me, then at him. "You're both imagining things." But the next time I came over, the house reeked of Lysol. Brenda was scrubbing the floorboards with a frantic energy. She was visibly agitated. Step 2 was dismantling her reality. Brenda was highly disorganized, but covered it up with expensive storage bins. She constantly misplaced her keys, her reading glasses, her phone. Usually she just blamed herself or brushed it off. I started moving things. Not far, just far enough. I would slide her reading glasses from the kitchen island to the top of the refrigerator. I would take her car keys from the hook by the door and drop them into the toe of her gardening boots. I would move her expensive face creams from the right side of the sink to the left side, slightly hidden behind a hand towel. Gaslighting is a slow burn. The first few times she just muttered to herself, frustrated. But by the third week, the constant micro-losses were fraying her nerves. She was always on edge, always hunting for something. "I am losing my mind," I heard her hiss to herself one afternoon, tearing apart the living room looking for her iPad. I had slipped it underneath the sofa cushion. "Everything okay, Brenda?" I asked sweetly from the doorway. "I put it right here on the table. I know I put it right here," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "Dad mentioned you've been a little forgetful lately," I lied smoothly. "It's probably just stress from the Garden Society tour. You take on so much." She looked at me, a flash of paranoia in her eyes. "Artie said that?" Just in passing, I smiled. Step 3 was targeting her social standing. Brenda's crown jewel was the upcoming Heritage Garden Society spring tour. Her backyard was a manicured masterpiece of imported roses and perfect boxwood hedges. She was hosting the planning committee, 6 of the wealthiest, most judgmental women in the county, for a luncheon at the house. The day before the luncheon, I came over to help her prep. Brenda was a ball of anxiety, barking orders at my dad and fussing over the sterling silver flatware. She asked me to polish the silver in the dining room while she ran to the specialty grocer. As soon as her car backed out of the driveway, I went to the garage. Brenda kept a shelf of highly toxic, commercial-grade weed killer. She was ruthless about dandelions. I took a spray bottle, emptied out the gentle, organic leaf shine she used for her indoor plants, and filled it with a diluted mixture of the weed killer. I walked into her pristine backyard. I didn't destroy the whole garden. That would be obvious vandalism. Instead, I targeted the showpieces, the prize-winning David Austin roses, the centerpieces of her boxwood maze. I sprayed the roots, just enough to poison the soil. It wouldn't happen overnight. It would take a few days for the leaves to start curling, turning a sickly yellow and dropping off, right in time for the tour. Then I went back inside. For the luncheon the next day, Brenda had prepared a complicated seating chart for the committee. She had printed out beautiful, calligraphed place cards. She placed them perfectly around the table. Before the women arrived, while Brenda was in the kitchen panicking over a soufflé, I walked into the dining room. I swapped the cards. I put Mrs. Higgins, the notoriously snobby society president, next to Mrs. Gable, a woman Higgins actively despised because of a years-long feud over property lines. I moved Brenda's card to the very end of the table, near the kitchen door, the least honorable seat. When the women sat down, the tension was immediate and suffocating. Mrs. Higgins looked at her placement, then at Brenda, her face tightening into a mask of offended fury. Brenda, rushing out of the kitchen with plates, froze when she saw the seating arrangement. "Oh, wait," Brenda stammered, her face flushing bright red. "That's not. I didn't put those there." "Really, Brenda?" Mrs. Higgins said, her voice dripping with ice. "Did the wind blow the place cards into this exact arrangement?" "Claire must have bumped the table," Brenda said frantically, looking at me. I stood in the corner, holding a tray of water glasses. I widened my eyes, looking hurt and utterly confused. "I haven't touched the table, Brenda. I've been in the kitchen washing dishes." The women exchanged looks. The looks clearly said, "Brenda is losing her grip." The luncheon was a disaster. The soufflé fell. The conversation was strained and hostile. Brenda drank 3 glasses of wine rapidly, her hand trembling. After they left, Brenda locked herself in the master bedroom and cried. My dad stood in the hallway, looking lost. I walked up to him and put a hand on his shoulder. "She's been so erratic lately, Dad," I whispered, shaking my head. "The memory lapses, the outbursts, and this morning I caught her staring blankly at the wall. Are you sure she's okay?" Dad rubbed his face, exhausted. "I don't know, Claire. I just don't know. It's like living with a stranger." And right then, as he stood there doubting his wife, the AC kicked on. A faint, undeniable wave of cedar and bergamot washed over the hallway. Dad closed his eyes. A tear slipped down his cheek. He missed my mother. He missed the reality Brenda had thrown away. I smiled. The foundation was cracking, and I was just getting started. Brenda communicated almost entirely in subtext. To truly understand her, you couldn't just listen to her words. You had to treat her like a complex, hostile translation project. You had to decode the non-linguistic cues, the micro-tension in her jaw, the specific pitch of her performative sighs, the way she weaponized silence. For months, she had used this invisible language to isolate my father and overwrite my mother's memory. Now, I was speaking her language, but I was changing the definitions of all her words. The Heritage Garden Society tour was scheduled for a bright, cloudless Saturday. Thursday evening, the first signs of the sickness appeared. Brenda was out on the patio with her morning coffee when I heard a sharp, guttural gasp. I walked out through the French doors. She was standing in the center of her prized David Austin rose beds. The deep, velvet crimson petals, which just a day prior had been taut and flawless, were now curled at the edges. A sickly, jaundiced yellow was creeping up the stems. The leaves looked like they had been scorched by an invisible fire. What is happening?" she whispered, her hands hovering over the dying blooms. She didn't dare touch them, as if the rot was contagious. "Oh no," I said, stepping up beside her. I infused my voice with a heavy, sympathetic dread. "Brenda, look at the boxwoods." She whipped her head around. The manicured green hedges framing the stone pathway were browning rapidly from the roots up. The structured, perfect lines of her garden were dissolving into a brittle, dying wasteland. The toxic mixture I had sprayed had worked its way deep into the root systems. There was no saving any of it. "Pests?" she stammered, panic finally cracking her beige exterior. "A fungus? We have to call the landscapers. Now, get Artie. Tell him to get out here." My father came out, bleary-eyed and clutching his newspaper. He took one look at the yard and sighed. It was a heavy, exhausted sound. "Brenda, I don't know what you want me to do. They're dead." "They can't be dead. The tour is in 48 hours. Her voice climbed an octave, bordering on a shriek. "I have 20 women coming here. The local paper is sending a photographer. Fix it, RT." "I can't resurrect plants, Brenda," he snapped. It was the first time I had heard him raise his voice to her in 2 years. She flinched. The absolute betrayal on her face would have been comical if it wasn't so pathetic. She spent the next 2 days in a manic frenzy, hiring an emergency crew to rip out the dead bushes and replace them with expensive, pre-potted, mature plants. But you can't fake a rooted garden. The new plants looked exactly like what they were, a desperate, superficial cover-up. The soil still smelled faintly of chemicals and decay. Saturday arrived. The society women descended like a flock of well-dressed vultures. Mrs. Higgins, still harboring cold fury from the luncheon seating debacle, took one look at the patchwork yard and smiled a smile that could cut glass. "Oh, Brenda," Mrs. Higgins crooned, adjusting her silk scarf, "how resourceful. I see you've opted for a more temporary aesthetic this year. It's very brave to show a garden in transition." The word times, temporary times, hit Brenda like a physical blow. She spent the entire afternoon sweating through her linen dress, offering frantic, contradictory explanations about soil, pH, and unexpected frost. The women nodded, sipped their iced tea, and judged her without mercy. Brenda's crown had been stripped. She was no longer the queen of their sterile little world. She was the chaotic, failing woman who couldn't even keep a rose bush alive. When the last car pulled out of the driveway, Brenda didn't go back inside. She sat on a stone bench in the middle of the fake garden and wept. Ugly, heaving sobs. I watched her from the kitchen window. I felt nothing. No pity, no remorse. Just the cold, mechanical satisfaction of a watchmaker watching the gears turn exactly as designed. The garden was her public defeat. Now it was time to finalize her private unraveling. I ramped up the sensory warfare. The house became a minefield of my mother's ghost. I didn't just spray the cedar and bergamot oil in the vents anymore. I started putting drops of it on my father's clothing, just a touch on the collar of his jackets in the hall closet. When Brenda hugged him, she would be hit with the olfactory phantom of his dead wife. She stopped touching him. The distance between them grew into a chasm. My dad started spending his evenings in the den, staring at the television without really watching it. Brenda paced the upstairs hallways. The misplaced items escalated. Her keys ended up in the freezer. Her expensive diamond tennis bracelet, a gift from my dad, vanished from her jewelry box, only to reappear 3 days later at the very bottom of the kitchen trash can, right as she was taking the bag out. "Someone is doing this," she hissed at me one afternoon. We were alone in the kitchen. Her hair, usually sprayed into a perfect helmet, was frizzy and unwashed. The dark circles under her eyes made her look feral. "Doing what, Brenda?" I asked calmly, pouring a cup of coffee. "Things are moving. Things are disappearing. The house smells like her." She pointed a trembling finger at the ceiling, gesturing to the empty space where the apothecary cabinet used to be. "Artie smells like her." "Brenda, maybe you should talk to a doctor," I suggested gently. "You've been under so much pressure. The garden, the society. It's normal to have memory lapses when you're stressed. And grief does strange things to the mind. Maybe you're manifesting these smells because you feel guilty." "Guilty?" She spat the word out. "Guilty for what? Tossing out a piece of rotting wood? It was garbage, Claire. It was holding this family back." I set my coffee mug down. The ceramic clinked sharply against the granite counter. It wasn't garbage. It was her life. But you know that, don't you? That's why you didn't donate it. That's why you sent it to the landfill to be crushed. You wanted to erase her. Brenda stared at me. Her chest heaved. You know about the landfill?" "Of course I know. I called them. I went there. I took a step toward her. The kitchen felt suddenly incredibly small. You lied to me. You lied to Dad. And now you're cracking under the weight of it. You're losing your mind, Brenda. Everyone sees it. The women at the society see it. Dad sees it. You." She breathed the word out, realization dawning in her bloodshot eyes. "It's you. You're moving my things. You killed my garden." "That's a very serious accusation," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "And honestly, who is going to believe you? The erratic, paranoid woman who puts her own keys in the freezer? The woman who can't even remember where she set her iPad down? Go ahead, tell Dad. Tell him his daughter is terrorizing you. Let's see whose side he takes." She lunged at me. She didn't hit me, but she grabbed my arms, her nails digging into my skin. She shook me, screaming incoherently. It was a guttural sound of pure, unadulterated frustration. And right on cue, the front door opened. "What the hell is going on in here?" my dad yelled, dropping his briefcase in the foyer. He walked into the kitchen. He saw his wife, looking deranged and violent, gripping my arms while I stood there, eyes wide, perfectly still, looking terrified. "Artie!" Brenda screamed, letting go of me and running toward him. "It's her! She's doing it! She's poisoning my garden! She's hiding my things! She's trying to drive me crazy!" My dad looked at her, then looked at me. I carefully rubbed my arms where her nails had left red crescent marks. I didn't say a word. I just let a single tear roll down my cheek. Dad looked back at Brenda. The exhaustion in his face hardened into something cold and final. "Brenda, stop." "Artie, you have to believe me. She just admitted it. She knows about the landfill. She knows I trashed the cabinet." The room went entirely silent. Dad blinked. "What did you just say?" Brenda froze. In her manic panic to prove my guilt, she had confessed her own. She slapped a hand over her mouth, but the words were already out, hanging in the air like smoke. "You told me you donated it," Dad said. His voice was dangerously quiet. "You told me a local charity picked it up for an arts program." I panicked, Brenda stammered, backing away from him. "It was just so heavy, and the junk guys were faster." "Artie, please, that's not the point. The point is Claire is trying to ruin me. You threw Stella's things into a landfill." Dad repeated it, as if trying to understand a foreign concept. He looked at the floor, then up at the ceiling. "Her journals, her work, you crushed them." "They were just things. We needed to move on," she pleaded. "No," Dad shook his head slowly. "You needed to move on. Because you couldn't handle being in her shadow. You couldn't handle the fact that this house will always belong to her. He walked past Brenda, ignoring her entirely, and came over to me. He gently touched my shoulder. "Are you okay, Claire?" "I'm fine, Dad," I whispered. He turned back to his wife, the woman he had let dress him, manage him, and dictate his life for the past 2 years. "Pack a bag, Brenda." "What?" "Artie, no. This is my house too. Pack a bag. Go stay at your sister's in the city. Just for a while. I need you out of this house." "You're kicking me out? Because of a piece of furniture?" The hysteria was returning, shrill and desperate. "I'm asking you to leave because I don't know who you are," he said. The absolute certainty in his voice broke her. There was no anger left, just a profound, hollow disappointment. "You lied to me. You tried to erase my wife. And now you're attacking my daughter and blaming her for your own mental breakdown. Go upstairs, Brenda." She looked at me. The hatred in her eyes was toxic, a dark, viscous thing, but beneath it was terror. She knew she had lost. She had played her hand, and I had flipped the board. She turned and walked up the stairs. Her footsteps were heavy, defeated. Brenda didn't just stay at her sister's for a while. The separation stretched from days into weeks and then into months. Without the heavy, suffocating blanket of her control, my father slowly began to wake up. It wasn't a miraculous recovery. Grief doesn't work like that. But the fog lifted. He started making his own coffee. He started wearing his old, faded flannel shirts instead of the stiff beige sweaters she had bought him. He stopped apologizing for existing in his own home. The divorce papers were filed in January. Brenda tried to fight for the house, claiming emotional distress and demanding half the equity. But her reputation in the community was shattered. The society women shunned her, whispering about her erratic behavior and the embarrassing garden fiasco. My dad's lawyer, armed with documentation of her memory lapses and her unhinged outburst in the kitchen, negotiated a settlement that bought her out and sent her packing for good. I helped Dad pack up the last of her things. We boxed up the synthetic lavender diffusers, the glass console table, the geometric vases. We dragged it all out to the curb. When the house was finally empty of her, we stood in the upstairs hallway. The space where my mother's apothecary cabinet used to be was still blank. The stark white paint Brenda had chosen mocked us. It was a scar, a physical reminder of what had been stolen and what could never be replaced. Dad reached out and touched the blank wall. His hand trembled slightly. "I let her do it," he said, his voice thick with tears he was fighting to hold back. "I was right here, Claire. I stood in the bedroom and I listened to those men carry your mother's life down the stairs. I didn't want to fight. I was so tired." "I know, Dad," I said. "I can't forgive myself for that." "You don't have to forgive yourself today," I told him. I linked my arm through his. We just have to live with it. A week later, I rented a U-Haul. I drove to an antique salvage yard 3 towns over. I spent 5 hours walking through dusty aisles of forgotten furniture until I found it. It wasn't an apothecary cabinet. It was an old, battered mapmaker's drafting desk. It was made of solid, dark walnut, heavy and scarred from years of use. It smelled like old wood and history. I bought it and drove it back to the house. Dad helped me carry it up the stairs. We set it down right in the blank space at the end of the hallway. The wood groaned softly as it settled into the floorboards. It didn't replace my mother's cabinet. Nothing could. But it filled the void. It was heavy. It was real. It was something that couldn't be easily erased. I took out the small amber glass bottle of my mother's perfume and the cedar oil. I didn't hide it in the vents this time. I uncapped it and placed it openly on top of the drafting desk. The rich, heavy scent of bergamot and wood filled the hallway, claiming the space back. My dad sat in his armchair that night, reading a book. He looked up, took a deep breath, and smiled. A real, genuine smile that reached his eyes for the first time in years. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. I looked out the window at the backyard. The winter frost had killed off the last of Brenda's fake garden. The ground was bare, dark, and resting, ready for something new to be planted in the spring. Something real. I had lost the physical pieces of my mother. I would never get her journals back. I would never hold her Linocut blocks again. But Brenda hadn't destroyed my mother's ghost. She had only forced me to become it. And honestly, being a ghost suited me perfectly. If this deep dive into family betrayal and psychological revenge kept you glued to the screen, hit that like button right now. Have you ever had to deal with a toxic step-parent or someone trying to erase your past? Drop your story in the comments below. I read every single one. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a twist. Share this video with someone who loves a dark, calculated payback.